Module 5, Evidence of Evolution. For Module 5, this is our most essential learning competencies. Explain evidences of evolution, including biogeography, fossil record, DNA protein sequences, homology, and embryology, and infer evolutionary relationship among organisms using the evidence of evolution. For your learning objectives, we're going to identify and describe some evidences of evolution, determine evolutionary relationships among organisms and how it supports evolution, and explain the importance of identifying the evidences of evolution. One provoking question is, how do we know that evolution has occurred? Scientist Linus Pauling aptly describes science as the search for truth. Science does this by continuously comparing its theories objectively with evidence in the natural world. In other words, science constantly tries to prove its assumption to be false and rejects implausible explanations. When scientists speak of evolution as a theory, they do not mean that it's a mere speculation. It is a theory in the same sense as the propositions that the Earth is round rather than flat. As a result of the massive amount of evidence for biological evolution accumulated over the last 2 centuries, we can safely conclude that the evolution has occurred and continues to occur. So since Darwin's time, scientists have gathered even more evidence to support the theory of evolution. Some of the evidence comes from fossils, and some comes from studies that show how similar living things are to one another. By the year 1930s, scientists had also learned about genes. As a result, they could finally explain how characteristics of organisms could pass from one generation to the next and change over time. And Charles Robert Darwin used multiple lines of evidence to support his theory of evolution by natural selection. So the evidence for evolution has primarily come from 5 sources: fossil record, biogeographical evidence, molecular biology, anatomical evidence, and comparative embryology. Fossil record. The resulting fossil record tells the story of the past and shows the evolution formed over millions of years. This evidence attests to the fact that there has been a tremendous variety of living things. But how do fossils provide evidence for evolution? Some extinct species had traits that were transitional between major groups of organisms. Their existence confirms that species are not fixed but can evolve into other species over time. The fossil record also provides abundant evidence that the complex animals and plants of today were preceded by earlier simple ones. In addition, it shows that multi-celled organisms evolved only after the first single-celled. This is the prediction of evolutionary theory. Another evidence to patterns of past evolution is found in the natural geographic distribution of related species. It is clear that the major isolated land areas and island groups often evolve their own distinct plant and animal communities. There are broad groups that evolved before the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea about 200 million years ago and are distributed worldwide, such as the unique flora and fauna of northern continents that form from the supercontinent Laurasia and of the southern continent that form from the supercontinent Gondwana. The presence of members of the plant family Proteaceae in Australia, Southern Africa, and South America is best explained by their appearance prior to the southern supercontinent Gondwana breaking up. The great diversification of marsupials, the native animals in Australia, and the absence of other mammals reflect Australia's long isolation. So Australia has an abundance of endemic species, the species that's found nowhere else. This is a typical island whose isolation by expansion of water prevents species migration. Another evidence of evolution is molecular biology. The biological molecules can reflect shared evolutionary ancestry. At the most basic level, all living organisms share the same genetic material or DNA, the same or highly similar genetic codes, the same basic processes of DNA expression, such as transcription, which DNA is copied to RNA, and translation, which RNA is used to produce proteins, and the same molecular building blocks, such as amino acids. These shared features suggest that all living things are descended from the ancestor. In general, the more DNA differences in homologous genes between two species, the more distantly the species are related. So the basic idea is that the two species have the same gene because they inherited it from a common ancestor. This illustration depicts the lines of evolutionary descent of different species, organisms, or genes from a common ancestor. These three diagrams have been used in evolutionary biology since the time of Charles Darwin. It is also called as phylogenetic tree. It's like a family tree class. The root of the tree represents a distant ancestor of the species that appear at the ends of the branches. The branches separate at nodes or points where ancestral lines split into new lines of evolution. The branches of the tree shows where genetic or physical similarities and differences between organisms begin or end. So understanding these three diagrams, it allows present-day researchers to use phylogenies to visualize evolution, organize their knowledge of biodiversity and structure, and a guide to ongoing evolutionary research. Another evidence of evolution is comparative anatomy. It refers to similar body parts, maybe homologies or analogies. But how does comparative anatomy provide evidence for evolution? Many groups of species share the same types of body structures because they inherited them from a common ancestor. This is the case with the vertebrates, which are animals that have internal skeletons, the arms of humans, the forelegs of dogs and cats, the wings of birds, and the flipper of whales and seals. All have the same types of bones, humerus, radius, and ulna, because they have retained these traits of their shared common ancient vertebrate ancestor. There are three types of anatomical structure. One, homologous structure. Those that are similar in multiple species and show that the organisms descended from a common ancestor. But it does not mean that the bodily structure will always have the same function. For example, four-limbed in mammals, bats, whales, dolphins, dogs, cats, humans, and other mammals have similar four-limb patterns. Although they look different on the outside, they are anatomically the same on the inside. 2. Analogous structure are those that are the same among different species that are not related. These organisms do not have a common ancestor, but their anatomical structures serve the same or similar purpose. A different ancestry can still lead to body parts with the same function. For example, the wings of butterflies and bats. The wings are both similar in shape and function, but butterflies and bats are different species and do not share a common ancestor. Another examples, we have birds and insect eggs are analogous. They serve the same function but have different evolutionary origins. Next, we have vestigial structure. This is also known as evolutionary leftovers. They are structures that have no function in an organism but they come from a common ancestor that did need the structure. And one of the given example in the illustration is the pelvic bones in the baleen whale are one of the evidence of evolution because they show structural change over time. Another example of vestigial structures are the limb bones in snakes that cannot walk, and the whale sharks that have teeth but are filter feeders. And there are flightless birds like the emu that have wings but cannot fly. And there are also cave-dwelling fish and reptiles that live in the dark but still have eye structure. Humans have many examples of vestigial structures in their bodies. We have the tailbone. It's one body part that does not serve a function anymore, but during development, the human embryo has a tail that disappeared, so the vertebrae used to make the tailbone. Then next we have wisdom teeth. In the past, people needed wisdom teeth to eat because the extra teeth helped them grind food. However, modern humans do not need these third molars. These anatomical structures of the body remain but do not serve a purpose. Humans have many examples of vestigial structures in their bodies. We have the tailbone. is one body part that does not serve a function anymore. But during development, the human embryo has a tail that disappeared. So the vertebrae used to make a tailbone. Then next we have wisdom teeth. In the past, people needed wisdom teeth to eat because the extra teeth helped them grind food. However, modern humans do not need these third molars. These anatomical structures of the body remain but do not serve a purpose. Another vestigial structure is appendix. It's a finger shape attached to a part of your large intestine, a small pouch. It's been unclear what role the appendix has in the body, and removal of the organ doesn't appear to have any negative health consequences. For many years, scientists believed the appendix was a vestigial organ, one that lost its original function through centuries of evolution. But some scientists now believe the appendix is not useless after all, and may help our guts recover after a gastrointestinal disease strikes. It protects a collection of beneficial gut bacteria and an important part of our immune system. Comparative embryology. The study of embryos is an important cornerstone of biological evolution and can be used to help determine similarities and differences between various species. An embryo of an organism is the fertilized egg as it goes through the process of development that are specific to that species. Most embryos look similar in their early stages, but as they develop, the differences between species become more obvious. Embryos of organisms that have a closer genetic relationship to one another tend to look similar for a longer period of time since they share a more recent common ancestor. Embryology supports the theory that organisms have a common ancestor in accordance to theory of evolution. The theory of evolution explains that not every feature of ancestor's embryo is shown in its descendants. That explains why embryos develop into different species over time. One of the essential questions is, why is the evidence of evolution important to humans and in the society? Understanding evolution class helps us solve biological problems that impact our lives. Knowing the evolutionary relationships among species, it allows our scientists to choose appropriate organisms for the study of such disease. In this way, a knowledge of evolution can improve the quality of human life. Evolutionary biology has contributed greatly to human understanding of ourselves by describing our origins, our relationships to other living things, and the history and significance of variation within and among different groups of people.
There are four major categories of evidence for evolution: fossil evidence, anatomical evidence, embryological evidence, and biochemical evidence. Let's look at fossil evidence first. Fossils are often used as evidence for evolution. They're the traces or remains of dead organisms that lived long ago. Sedimentary rock contains the most fossils and is formed from mud, sand, silt, and other fine particles. To make a fossil, first, the animal needs to die and be quickly buried under the mud or silt so that no other critters will be able to break down the dead animal. Over time, the minerals in the mud and silt will replace the tissue of the animal and will later reveal a mold or cast of the long-dead organism. The law of superposition is that older layers are on the bottom and younger layers of rock are on top. This allows us to relatively figure out the age of different organisms or fossils that we find in layers of rock. So an organism found below another organism would be older than the one on top. So letter Z is older than letter X in this case. Absolute dating places a numerical age range using radiometric dating, luminescence dating, dendrochronology, and amino acid dating. Some scientists prefer not to call it absolute, but chronometric or calendar dating instead, because the word absolute makes it sound much more certain and precise than it really is. It's still an estimation, like the relative dating of rocks based on the law of superposition, but it has a number to it. For example, in dendrochronology, scientists count the rings in a tree to estimate the number of years that have gone by. Differences in growth through the seasons create a ring, and it generally takes 1 year, but there can be some variation. Transitional species are intermediate species, which may be in the fossil record or could be missing from the fossil record. It's proposed that there would be evidence of species that were in the middle evolution steps from one species to another. Archaeopteryx, pictured here, is used to provide a link between the theory that birds evolved from reptiles. Now we're going to start looking at the anatomical evidence for evolution. Homologous structures help scientists find relatedness among species. There are anatomical structures in different species that originated by heredity from a structure in the most recent common ancestor of the species. For example, if you look at the bone structure of a pterodactyl, a bat, and a bird, you'll see some basic similarities. This suggests that they had a common ancestor with a similar forearm structure, perhaps very long ago. But if you look at how they use their forearms for flight, they're very different. The pterodactyl has one long finger that spans a large section of the wing, the bat has a wing between its fingers, and the bird has feathers all along the forearm. These are analogous structures because even though they have closely related functions, they do not have a common ancestor for that function. Each of these species evolved their ability to fly from a different ancestral line. Vestigial structures are another piece of evidence because the structures seem to serve no function, but resemble structures with functional roles in other organisms. An example that's commonly used is the human appendix. The appendix was thought to be a shrunken remain of the cecum that can be found in many kinds of herbivores. The idea is that it's a remnant of evolution yet to be truly removed. In 2013, however, scientists refuted the relationship between cecum size and appendix presence. The appendix is actually a housing complex for mutualistic bacteria that aid in digestion for many species, including humans. Embryology is the study of the development of embryos. The more closely related species would be similar in their earliest stages of development. These exaggerated drawings by Ernst Haeckel were used to show similarities between early stages of an embryo among different species, including salamanders, pigs, and humans. Now, while they're not truly accurate, they were some of the first attempts at using embryology as evidence for evolution. Today, the stages are studied at the same point in their evolution, unlike these images. Lastly, when we read DNA and amino acids to find a quantitative way to organize evolutionary ancestry, we're using a molecular clock. Mutations happen at a steady rate, and the more mutations there are mean a more distant relationship between the species. Fewer mutations means a more recent common ancestor. So, based on the amino acid differences between human hemoglobin and gorilla hemoglobin, gorillas are the closest relative to humans on this list. And lampreys are the furthest.
For your group activity, a fossil record activity to be specific, using the diagram below that represents neighboring sedimentary rocks formation, answer the following guide questions. 1. Which layer is the oldest in each formation? How could you tell? 2. Suppose fossils from layer C of formation 2 are the same as fossils from layer D in formation 1. What can you say about the age of fossils from layer E? 3. Suggest one or more geological events that might explain why formation 2 has fewer layers than formation 1. And for your individual activity, complete the chart by checking the kind of evidences of evolution. And answer the following guide questions. 1. Does evolution work without natural selection? Explain. 2. How reliable is the fossil record of evolution? 3. Name at least 2 types of evidences and explain how it supports evolution.